All right, welcome back to Terrible at Fishing. So, Ken is with us this week, and he's
Hello.
sick.
Oh gosh.
He's one sick puppy.
I'm good. I'm good. Social distancing and fishing go together, right?
You know what? It does. When COVID was in its thralls, kayak fishing could not have been more popular. And now that all that has settled down for the most part, kayak sales are really slow right now. And you can get kayaks that are $1,000 down to $700 now. It's just amazingly affordable right now to buy a kayak. But
Yep.
yeah, it was the perfect social distancing. Go out on a kayak, and nobody could get within 6 feet of you. So, and the fish evidently stayed away too. So this week, I thought we would just have fun because I've missed my buddy Ken.
Oh,
He doesn't look too bad to everybody. I mean, for a sick guy, he's pretty good looking. So we're going to talk about our favorite catches, and I thought I would start out with my very first fish. Is my very first fish, and I had an uncle, Uncle Joe, and he took me camping up on the other side of the Sierra Nevada range above Lone Pine, and he was a big outdoorsman. We were camping, there, and there was this little creek, and in the creek I saw a little rainbow trout. He was just sort of sitting in a little cove there. So I took a little fly and a line. So I guess I'd been fly fishing before, and I'm just skipping it across the top of the water, with my hand. And I was probably about, man, how old was I? 9 years old, maybe. I was 9, I think, when I caught my first fish. And I'm just skipping it across, and the rainbow trout took it, and I put it in a bucket with water, and I took it to the campsite. My Uncle Joe, he being a big outdoorsman, Mike says, he goes, you got to kill it. You got to, gut it, and we'll eat it. And I was 9 years old, maybe 8, I don't know, something like that. And I looked down in that bucket, and I saw this little fish. He's probably about 7 inches, 8 inches. And he was just swimming around in the bucket, and he's pretty cute. I had him in that bucket, and I looked at that bucket all night long. And the more I looked at him, the more I thought he was kind of cute, and I couldn't kill him. My uncle says it ain't it. You can't call it you catch it, you kill it. It's just the way it is. It's the way he did it. So I couldn't do it. So I took it back to the creek, and I put it back in the next morning alive. And so that was my very first fish. I did it with a string in hand and a little fly, and I just skipped it. And because my Uncle Joe was, I mean, he killed everything. He accidentally shot his own son once on a deer hunt. Well, my cousin Paul survived. It's just a gut shot. He's still around today, as honored as ever, with a scar in his belly. Yeah, they say it was an accident. I'm not sure. I would have shot Paul too. He's back then. So, what was your very first fish, Ken?
I don't know that I have that memory handy. I
Oh, okay.
never had a problem putting a trout in a frying pan. My my dad used to take us to the South Fork of the Rogue River every summer for a couple weeks in the camper, And, that goes back to being able before we could walk. And so some of my earliest memories are following them through the brush, chasing brook trout. And we always filled up our creels and brought them back and fried them up for breakfast. And then I would often go downriver after that. And that's probably the first fish I really remember is I had, after a brook trout breakfast, headed down the creek instead of upriver like my dad always liked to fish. And there was a stump and a fish, for that creek was really, big for the creek, much bigger than anything we ever caught. Bit the line, and of course it got off after a short play, but it impressed me, and I still dream about that when the shadow comes up from under the stump.
Yep.
And hits your lure, and it's one of my favorite memories and one of my favorite experiences about fishing is that, sense happens in rivers, but creek fishing in general, you can't get it any other way. And the biggest fish in the creek is the trophy, right? No matter how big it is. And I've spent a lot of time on the little Deschutes, and that'll happen there where you're just chasing a bunch of little brook trout and brown trout and rainbow, and then all of a sudden, one of those monsters will come up from under an undercut bank or something. And I mean, if you're asking me what my favorite fish is, that's it right there, right? The biggest fish in the body of water you're fishing.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think of all my firsts, when it comes to fishing. And that one little rainbow trout with Uncle Joe and Aunt Frances, and over there, and then it's probably, I just keep thinking about all those little firsts that I had. I remember one time I'm from a coastal town near Santa Barbara, so we used to go out on the ocean for a couple days typically. We do some deep sea fishing. And I remember this one time we went out there. And one thing about deep sea fishing is you can't be queasy. Because those waves, they kind of hit you. And everybody on the boat was pretty much they were feeding the fish. They were feeding fish. And when I sleep on a boat, I sleep on my belly. This way my belly don't go up and down, although I was pretty skinny. Nowadays, my belly would really go up and down. I need a bigger boat nowadays. And so I get up the next morning. Everybody's just sicker than a dog. And me being me, I had tapioca pudding. Those little cups. Ain't nothing more fun than making people feed the fish, I'd put a little tapioca in my mouth. The nice thing is I had anywhere on the boat to myself. I dropped the line down there and I hooked into what I thought was, I don't know, a rock. And this was my very first fish of its kind. And I just kept, how old was I? About 11. And I'm cranking this thing up, and it felt like I had an anchor on the line. And, the deckhand came over and he saw me working the rod, and I finally got this big old giant lingcod up. And as soon as he saw the lingcod, he grabbed the gaff and he gaffed that thing up and pulled it into the boat. And I'd never seen a lingcod before. I mean, it really is one of my favorite fish to catch because you can cut a big old steak off of those things. And they have these razor needle-like teeth on them. And I mean, they're just the meanest looking thing that you've ever seen. And he didn't swim left or right or out or down. He swam straight down, like he just didn't want to come up. And he gaffed that thing in, and I caught my first lingcod, and it was, I don't ask me how big it was because I was littler, so it was huge. But cut some big old 6-inch steaks off of that thing, and it was just a fantastic fight out on the ocean, and everybody else was, I had the whole boat. I had the whole boat to myself.
Yeah, must be nice.
Gotta love tapioca pudding. I was 11. What do you think? I've always been a little ornery.
We spend a lot of time fishing for lingcod off the jetties because of that reason right there. I can't hold my own on the boat at all. But they put up a fight from the jetty. You got to use steel leaders and to get them out of the rocks. I even went in through a phase where we were poke poling. You ever hear of poke poling on the jetty?
No, I
so
never
we made
heard of
our
that.
own. For about $400, you could buy a telescopic poke pole with an internal guide system. The line runs up through the pole and it extends out to about 17 feet. But, I didn't have that kind of money. So we went out and got the biggest, longest bamboo poles we could find. We cut them down to size to that 17-foot mark and bolstered the end with a steel leader and crimped it on, and then crimped a swivel to that so we could hook the jigs directly to the leader. So then you just jam that thing down between the rocks and wiggle it around. And you bring it up straight when you hook one as best you can, because you can't really play them like a rod. So yeah, that hook pulling method was pretty interesting. We had a lot of fish where the big ones would just get you wedged in a rock, and with the steel leader, you'd even have a hard time breaking it sometimes. My friend Wally, who I bring up on another show before, he just caught one off of rocks up there out of Newport, out of Depot Bay, I think, where that thing, I bet you, was over 20 pounds, and he got it. He got it on a trout rod, so kind of got lucky, with those toothy critters. You can't often bring them in.
He probably played that for a half hour.
My favorite saltwater fish, though, is got to be my 44-pound salmon. Probably the biggest fish I've ever landed. Wow. Had some sturgeon on bigger, but there is a spot, and I hesitate to even bring this up, no matter how big the audience, at the mouth of the Windchuck. So the last river in Oregon, right before you cross the border, where the Windchuck goes under 101, it opens up into an estuary. It's not even an estuary. It's still a kind of a creek setting as it winds its way through the gravel, and then it just spills out over the beach and cuts a new channel every tide. And you can see the incoming pulses of fish, coming through the new creek, and you can't really catch them where it cuts through the sandbar, it's through the beach. But once they get into the river, right above right where it starts to become rocky, there's a big pool there, and they just kind of hole up and get ready right there. It's just a tiny little estuary, and they bite lures. And yeah, we've had some amazing days at that spot.
Yeah, we're gonna be heading over there, I think, in November. It's October now, huh? So it's next month.
Yep. We caught 4 of those fish that day, and I caught 2 clones at over 43, 44 pounds. The one we weighed was 44 pounds, and put them both back. And we watched another old guy catch 3 or 4 of those that day, helped him land them, and put those all back too. So it's, I'd recommend a catch and release, like shooting fish in a barrel. Sometimes there's no hatchery there, so they're all, they all got their fins on them, and they're really close to the Klamath mouth there in Smith River. So, that's some of that. And it may even be closed this year. I'm not sure what's going on. Those Klamath runs that just haven't been doing so good.
Well, there's Klamath's still cleaning itself out.
Well, that's
So
not why. Actually, they're from what I hear, they're having a banner year for
are they?
salmon numbers. I'm talking the dams are the reason the fish haven't been doing so good. One of the
Right.
many reasons,
Well, I just
of
figured it was
course,
still
yeah.
cleaning itself out.
But what
You
they
know.
do, they limit the entire fishery, and this is probably baloney, just based on lack of great science. But they'll just shut down the whole thing from what is it, humbug? The whole Brookings fishery suffers sometimes. Checo and all of them because the climate stocks are doing so bad. You can't fish for anything out in the ocean, and that's been
Hmm.
going on for decades now.
Well, I've never done ocean fishing up here. All my ocean fishing's been in Santa Barbara County, San Luis Obispo County, you know,
Yeah, you
LA.
can still fish for rockfish. Yeah, the
Yeah.
salmon fishery. Yeah.
Yeah, we get it. We get a lot. I would love to go salmon fishing or tuna fishing. I would love to catch a tuna. I mean, that thing, a yellowfin tuna just looks like a monster to hook into and to land. So I
Well,
would
we don't
love.
have those big yellow fins, but we do got an Oregon tuna fishery. Some of those guys will launch their dories right off the beach and go straight out to the tuna ground instead of running all day long out of a bay. Pretty
Well, I
interesting.
would,
I got a buddy who launches his dory off the beach. I don't know that I got the guts for that.
yeah, it all depends on the ocean. What's it look like, and the weather report. I mean, last time I had never been to the Oregon coast until this year, and we went to Newport, and they had 30-foot swells, and I really wanted to go fishing, but there was no boats that were launching. I mean, all the fishermen were in, the bars and stuff like that. They weren't going out. I mean, but I really wanted to go out there and catch some fish, but didn't happen. I remember, my new YouTube channel is called Terrible at Fishing, and when I lived in Southern California, I could not catch a fish. I don't know what it is. I think it was just a bunch of conceited little narcissistic fish, and they would not bite the hooks or anything I put in the water. And I actually fished pretty good in the San Joaquin Valley, but when I moved down to LA, I could not catch a fish. And so I started this channel. I was also went through my paralysis, but terrible at fishing. I figured, okay, I can't catch a fish. And I go fishing, and I get home, and my wife says, "Did you catch anything?" My son and I said, "No." And so finally, I had never caught a bass in my life. I had never caught a bass. And so we were in the Castaic Lagoon, and I was using a topwater spook bait, or a walking bait, you may call it's called, or a pencil bait. It looks like a cigar. It's just a
Mhm.
tubing, and you just walk it on top of the water. And so we were in the Castaic Lagoon, which is a little lagoon below Castaic Lake, and I was just walking my bait across the water, and then all of a sudden this blow up happens. Now I had never caught a bass before, let alone don't think I've ever caught a topwater fish before, and so this was kind of memorable. And this piece, he just jumped out of the water, he hit it, and it's I still have the picture. I mean, and it's just, and I'm reeling this thing because it was only about, I don't know, 6 years ago, 5 years ago. It wasn't that long ago. Now I catch like 40, 50 bass in a day, but I got better. But I moved because LA bass are terrible. And so I pulled this thing in. It was 2.5 pounds. That was my very first bass, 2.5 pounds. And that's a nice sized bass. Now I had no idea. I have my son take a picture of this bass and me, and give him a big kiss and put him back in the water. But uh, my very first bass was over in Castaic Lagoon, and it wasn't that long ago. A lot of people think that I've been, I have been fishing my whole life, but I haven't. I got kind of hooked, literally, on bass fishing, because bass fishing it's hard. It's just hard. But and once you figure it out, it's easier. But it's hard to learn how to figure it out. So it was that that one sticks in my memory all the time when I'm catching a bass. I always go revert back to that day with my son in my boat, and we caught I caught it on a walking bait. So that was a pretty cool bass. I know it
Yeah.
was only 2.5 pounds. It was my personal best though back then.
Yep. Yep. We
So
have
what?
I think my best memory when it comes to bass fishing is at Howard Prairie.
Mm.
And there was three of us in a boat that day, and we were having good fun. Wally was there. Okay, we'll bring Wally on the show here.
We're gonna have to go fishing with Wally one day.
Yeah, he's a fishing fool. We couldn't get bit all morning. We couldn't. There was no fish in the whole lake. And then I think I reached over to take a drink of beer while I was retrieving my lure, and I got bit. So I think we figured out that pattern. It was on the drop, and so we went from catching, not even getting a bite, and figuring out that a big spinner bait with on the drop was going to catch everything every cast. And one of the guys, he was a little slower on the uptake. He couldn't really figure it out. So for a couple hours, Wally and I were catching fish with this little pattern that the other guy couldn't really figure out. And about an hour, a little over an hour later, it's like, I don't know why you're catching fish and I'm not catching. Have you been paying attention? We found out a pattern here. You got to let it drop. He's literally that quick. Let that thing drop and caught his first fish for the day.
Bass can be finicky, and they love catching things on the drop. They love
Yeah.
it. And a lot of times I will, when I fish nowadays, depending on the type of lures that I'm using or bait, I will let them drop. I will reel it up and let it drop again, and that's how I play the presentation as the bait continues to come towards me. So it'll drop like 15 times before it gets back to me.
Yep.
So
Yep.
that's the way you work it. And bass fishing, like I said, it's cunning many times depending on your water temperature and the water, the hatchery that you're at has a lot to do with it. And so I remember when I moved up here 4 years ago, I heard that you could do ice fishing, and I had never seen a lake frozen over. So, I'm from California. Lakes don't freeze over in California. And so I went over to Gerber Lake. I went over to Gerber Lake one day, and I saw that, I mean, it was frozen, and I saw this guy out on the lake fishing. It was like, all right, well, I'll walk out there and say hi to the guy. And so I just, I went from lake to lake just to see what, conditions were like. And so I walk, I'm scared. I think, I don't know if I was really scared, but I was really cautious. So I followed exactly in his steps, out to where he was. Cause I didn't have a poker or anything like that. And I never walked on frozen water before, and I wasn't sure how thick it was. And so I walk all the way out there to this guy, and he's catching fish, and he goes, you want to try it? And I go, yeah, I'd love to try it. Yeah, it's like most of us, he had more than one pole, and so he had more than one hole, and so I dropped that line down there, and I caught a perch, and I know it's just a perch, but it was my first ice fishing fish. And so I pull this thing up, and he's taking a picture of me with my little perch. And it slipped out of my hand, and it went down my shirt. perch hurt. They got those really sharp fins. You don't want to.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to sort of pet them back in order to hold them because those fins are sharp. And so this thing is inside my shirt, and he's like taking pictures of me with a fish in my shirt. And finally got it out. Well, I got hooked on ice fishing too, boy. I was like, we caught so many fish, me and that guy, and it was just I never experienced before, and it was just we caught. I mean, actually, nice thing about Gerber, they do have good sized perch in that lake. I mean, you could catch a good 12-inch, perch in that lake. And of course, their crappie are really good too. So, I mean, they have good crappie and they have pumpkin seed sunfish, and it's actually a great panfish lake. So, anyway,
I've never been able to scare up a crappie through the ice at Gerber. I have caught lots of perch through the ice, and even some red-eared sunfish. I got cautioned that they're not pumpkin seeds. We don't have pumpkin seeds around here.
Really?
Yeah, that's what I've been told.
Looks like a pumpkin seed.
Red-eared or green-eared or green sunfish is what I was told. Well, but we've tried to pattern the crappie through the ice at Gerber, and even had some electronics now and again, and not had some luck. It's a trick, I guess. Even in the lakes where they catch a lot of crappie through the ice, it's still a trick to get on them, even day to day.
Usually I catch crappie through the ice in the late afternoon.
Is that right?
I don't usually get them in the morning. I'll catch them like at 4:30 or so in the afternoon.
At Lake of the Woods?
Well, anywhere. I mean, typically through the ice. They like to pop up later in the day.
Where do you catch crappie through the ice around here?
Well, you could right by the dam at Gerber Lake. Where that turn is.
I've tried it many times. Yeah.
That is a great spot for crappie over there.
Are they suspended in there?
Yeah, of course.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely suspended.
That's the hard part.
Usually about 6 to 8 feet down. But I'll tell you, if you get a flasher,
yeah.
I mean, something, like these Merkums or what was the other brand? But you just get a flasher, and the flashers are, I mean, it's the most fun thing you ever do because it's a video game. You can see your bait go down, you can see the fish come around, and you just tease, and if he loses interest, you just follow him back down again, and you can watch it on your flasher on this fish finder. And this one guy, he had one, that guy that I caught my first fish with, and he showed me how to use a flasher, and he goes, "Now watch, it'll get real red." And I was like, he goes, "Okay, it's about to get," and then you can feel it, and then you pull them up. And so I love using a flasher for ice fishing. It just makes the whole day go by so fast because it's like watching a video game, and it's very interactive. Yeah. So it's just a lot of fun. So, and if you're in a shelter, it's warm. I mean, I have a shelter, and at Lake of the Woods, you can rent a shelter. I think it's like $10, for the day. Rent a shelter, big whoop. It's nothing. I tell people to rent shelters all day long. I think I have 8 of them.
My first ice fishing experience was at Lake of the Woods, and it was probably about 1999 or something like that. And we pulled up there to fish off a shore one November day, and it was all frozen over. We'd been there the day before and had great luck right in the shallows there behind the lodge. Mm-hmm. And so we didn't have anything. I had a rasp in my truck with my saw kit, and we ended up punching holes with a rasp that day and having one of it's literally to this day the best trout day I've ever had through the ice. And we probably caught 15 fish that day, let most of them go, and we had kept a couple. So we're kind of been there all day long, and I hooked a nice one, probably 4 pound, 5 pound brown trout with a hook jaw and teeth, and it was too big to get through the hole because the raft, we weren't making the holes
Yeah.
very big, and I reached down through the ice and gilled him and locked it in through his teeth, through his jaw, so he couldn't get away while we started banging out the rest of the hole to make it big enough to get him out. Of course, my friend hit my knuckles and I took over at that point. And luckily it wasn't an axe because that's what we normally use. And we got the hole widened out and brought that fish out. And it was probably the second best fish I've ever caught through the ice, maybe third best fish I've ever caught to the ice to this day. We took an amazing picture. George, this was kind of before a lot of people were ice fishing at Lake of the Woods. There was a group of Russians who came every year, and us, and some old guys. My shop teacher, Mr. Van Ness, shout out Mr. Floor, Mr. Van Ness, the old teachers. They're probably not around anymore, but they would be there every year. There was just this handful of us who spent any time on the ice, and that's really changed now. But so George comes out and gets a picture. I'm going somewhere with this, I promise. George comes out and gets a picture with our keepers on the ice and me holding that big one. Me and my friend Zach are kneeled down, and it's just a beautiful picture. About 6 months later, someone calls me. Oh, Zach calls me up, said, "Did you see our picture in the magazine?" Oregon Washington Game and Fish had ran the photo in a ice fishing special nationwide. Talk about Rainy Lake and Lake of the Woods, Minnesota, and then talk about Lake of the Woods, Oregon. They had a picture of us, me holding that big old brown trout. And George, I called George, and he said he didn't remember.
About George Gregory, one of the owners.
Yeah. Yes, sir. This was when he was the manager back then.
Yeah.
He said, I don't remember giving him that photo or permission to use it. I said, I'll give him a call. And George said, don't worry about it. It's promotion for the resort.
Yeah.
So I ended up, because of that, writing articles for that magazine and a number of others after that for years. Actually, really until just recently, and I'm still a writer in my career, but that surprise, great photo, George being there and having a rasp and showing up that morning, it turned into somewhat of a career for me.
That's awesome. And George and I are good friends. And so we do a lot. We do a lot of stuff together up at the lake. Was it? Oh, yeah. Here's a good one. Again, after I moved up here, because you don't catch anything in Southern California practically. Southern California, if everybody goes down there, you want to go fishing, don't, because it's lousy. So I had to move up here to start catch fish again. And so I took I knew I don't know if I met him or maybe he was a viewer of mine, a subscriber on my channel. And he invited me to go on the Williamsons with him. So I went on the Williamsons with him and on our kayaks. And I hooked into, I had never caught a red-banded trout before. So there's a lot of firsts, that I actually, and I think that's why they stick in my memory so well. So we were working this bend, over on the Williamsons, and I hook into this red-banded trout, and he was 21 and a half inches after I landed him. I measured him. So it was a good size trout. And usually I'm used to catching farm trout. You go to Lake of the Woods, there's not a single trout there that was natural. So they're all farm trout. And so this thing just fought me really, really well. And so, I was in my kayak and I land him. I take some pictures and then I measured him. And then when I put him back, he swam away so slowly, like it was like, like he was like Jaws. You know, when you watch Jaws, the movie, he has a slow swim with purpose, and that's the way this guy swam away from me. He just swam away with this, like he owned the water. And 21 and a half inches, he's still my personal best on my for a red banded trout. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot bigger, but he's my personal best for that. But it was a beautiful day out on the water, and I had never, you know, I don't think I'd ever put my kayak in a river before. So typically my kayak always went into, other stuff, lakes usually. But that was pretty cool. That was a really cool trout. And I got to, I started making flies this last few days, and I got my woolly buggers, I think, down. But now I'm trying some other crazy stuff. So I don't know. I got to learn how to fly fish now. But that was a cool fish. That was a very cool fish, and I think about all these fish that I catch up here. That I'd never caught before. See, California's got different fish, and it's just different. I mean, they got trout and stripers and stuff like that. Another great place I love to catch fish was in the Ventura. Ventura's got a big, giant marina with mansions and yachts, and it's like a city. So I took my boat into the marina, and they're like the canals are for the yachts and for their private docks. And I would catch so many, calico bass there, mackerel. But the beautiful thing about fishing in the Ventura Marina was not only because I love boats. I mean, who doesn't like looking at a cool looking yacht? But you could shoot their docks and stuff and just catch stuff. But it was really the dolphins. They'd come in to the marina and they'd swim right up to you. And dolphins are sort of like the puppy dog of the ocean. They like to roll over, and they like their bellies rubbed. And so, I remember the very first time I was on my surfboard. They're scary because they have these scratches. Dolphins have scratches on them. They're called rake marks. And the alpha dolphin has to establish himself, and he does that by kind of raking other dolphins, establishing his dominance. And that's what those scratches are on dolphins. But I didn't know that. I just saw these dolphins with look like teeth marks on them, and it was scary because they're big. Bottlenose dolphins are big. They're 8 feet, 9 feet. They're big fish. Or they're not fish, but you know what I mean. They're mammals. And I had like 5 of them around me my very first time, and on my surfboard. And I wasn't gonna, I was kind of scared, but I have a long board, 9-footer, but I wasn't touching them. And then my legs were hanging off of my board, of course. And this dolphin came underneath me and touched my feet underneath my, swam under me so my feet would pet him. And then he came up next to me and he rolled over on his side and he did a flipper on me. Remember, well, nobody remembers Flipper, but anyway, it's an old movie, old TV show. And he got on his side and he literally waved at me with his flipper. And then he rolled over and he let me pet him. And there was these people, this was at a beach in Santa Barbara County called El Capitan. And there's people, I was the only surfer out there. And these people were up on the cliff watching me pet the dolphins. My wife took pictures of them, but it looks like, from the shore, it looks like a bunch of sharks because you just see their fins, around me. And it was, I can't tell you, it is probably the coolest wild animal interaction you could possibly have, because most wild animals are very skittish. They'll either attack or run, one of the two, but not a dolphin. A dolphin literally wants tactile, interaction. They want to be touched, and it's amazing. I mean, I've been in. I mean, I've surfed, most of my life until I had my brain injury, and I've at one time I was in in Oceanside surfing, and there were hundreds of dolphins in the water with me. I mean, there were countless. They were just filled. It was just by the pier in Oceanside. They were just all over the place, and they're in the waves with me when I'm surfing. It was, I mean, that was pretty cool. Good pictures. Got a lot of good pictures with me with dolphins. You have any more fish stories, Ken?
Yeah, I got plenty of fish stories. Now, that I was fishing in the bay at Eureka, and I believe that's a Eel River mouth, if I'm not mistaken. And I wasn't catching any fish, but I thought I kept seeing fish surfacing, porpoising. I thought there was some salmon in the estuary, and they got closer and closer. And dang, if the whole dang bay from where I was at wasn't full of little, what seemed to me pinkish purpled hued dolphins.
Oh,
and so yeah, and they were surrounded.
Dolphins, but
they were little though. They were no bigger than 2 feet, let's say, long, if that. And
yeah, pink dolphins are small.
Yeah, so I looked it up, and there is such thing as a pink dolphin, but the Humboldt group of dolphins spends a lot of time in that bay. But I asked around. I stopped at the restaurant out on the island and had breakfast. Asked the waitress and some fishermen if they'd ever seen something like that. I just said, "Oh, the dolphins are here." They're like, "What? You weirdo!" What? And I know what I was seeing. I'm not hallucinating. But yeah, none of them had heard anything or seen anything like that.
Typically, pink dolphins aren't. And if we have a really good El Nino, bring some warm water up, I guess we could have them, but typically they like warmer water, so it's usually a South America thing, down over in the Baja, that area. But
yeah.
I've never seen one. I mean, I know I've seen them on film, but I've never seen one in real life. But it'd be really cool to see. That would be really cool.
There were hundreds, if not thousands, and they were all small, and they were surfacing, 50 times a minute around me. So
that is so cool.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Pictures?
I got pictures, but you can't see it. It's, you see something, a fin, and it's dark. You can't really catch them. But it wasn't for the camera. It was for me. I had been to a conference, a tribal conference at Bear Mountain, I think it's called, just south there, and it was a Native American Fish and Wildlife Society conference, and it was a pretty big deal. One of the first times that we had announced some of the plans we had with the Modoc Nation in the homelands here, and so it was kind of a powerful, experience to begin with, and that is how it capped off. And so I just kind of figured that it was a sign of approval that we're on the right track.
They're supposed to be good luck. Dolphins. I mean, they have sort of a magical, mystical legend that goes with pink dolphins. So I mean, that's pretty cool. I didn't know we had them off of our coastline.
I don't know.
That'd be cool.
I don't know if we do.
Again.
Probably everybody who would hear that would tell me I'm crazy, but I know what I saw. I know what I saw.
I mean, I'm from Southern Cal, so I mean, El Nino would bring a lot of stuff up to us, and as
Yeah.
those warm water currents would come up,
Oh yeah.
there. I mean, man of wars. I mean, a man of war jellyfish isn't something you would normally find in our waters, but those things have 160-foot stingers on them. So
Yeah.
I was there is the only thing the only wild animal I'm afraid of is a jellyfish. I mean, I don't like jellyfish. I mean, yeah, they're cool looking behind glass, but I can't tell you how many times I've grabbed one, paddling out or something, because they're completely stealthy. And then and the man of war, he could be a football field practically away from you, and you still get stung. I mean, it's just not right. You don't even have you can't even prepare for it. Yeah, I don't like jellyfish. I don't like jellyfish at all. I remember one time I was down in I used to surf, and I know this is a fishing show, but this is it's a fishing tale. I was down in Del Mar surfing, and Kathy and I think Becca, my oldest, was only like a year old at the time, and so they were on the beach, and I'm out there surfing, and I was way past the breaker, so the break it was breaking pretty far out, and all of a sudden, two orcas came over not too far from me, and it was a mama and a baby. And orca fins are very unique, and you got the mama's fin that was just protruding straight out of the water, just a good 4 feet, and then you got the baby right next to him, and I'm yelling for my wife to take a picture because back then it was we didn't have cameras that a lot of nowadays everybody's got a camera, and you could put even my phone is waterproof. So I'm out there yelling, and Kathy didn't hear me, but these two orcas were, I don't know, probably 20 yards from me, and I just was amazed that orcas are in the dolphin family. So basically, they're just big giant dolphins with teeth that like to eat things, preferably not me. So I was out there with these two orcas, a mother and a baby one. I don't know, what do they call baby ones? Pups? Pup. I think that's what they call baby whales. And it was again, surfing is like kayaking in a way, because you're right there on the water. And so anything in the water is a more intimate interaction. And that's what I love about kayaking. Kayaking, it's since you're in the water, it's more intimate. Even catching a fish is more exciting because you're right at eye level. Everything is more fun on a kayak. And then, of course, I don't surf anymore, and I don't kayak anymore because I can't stand. I have lousy balance because of my brain injury, and then I almost died on kayak. So, I ever tell you that story? Yeah, I told you the story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was 2 years ago, and
So,
George was on vacation, but all the other owners were there. Yeah, that was a bad day. Yeah, I didn't catch a thing except for hypothermia. You got to be careful. In my book, my terrible fishing book, the last chapter's on ice fishing, and I literally scare you out of the water because there are so many precautions that I want people to take before stepping out on the ice. And so if you read it, you're probably thinking, I ain't never going to do that. But I did fall through the ice once at Lake of the Woods, because we had a few years ago, we had this big rupture, in the lake. It had ruptured. And I got out there probably at 5 a.m. It was still dark, and I knew where I was going. But this rupture, I was going to go over the rupture, and I broke through the ice. And fortunately, the ice was layered. so only fell through about 15 inches,
It happens all the
onto
time.
another layer of ice.
Yeah.
And when you walk out on the ice, I mean, at first, scared the crud out of me, but I just pull my leg out of this hole. But you got to be very aware. And going out on the ice when it's dark is probably the most unwisest thing you could do. Don't do it in the dark because you can't see diddly squat. And then if you fall through, who's going to come and get you? Not a whole lot of people. You dead.
The good news is that Lake of the Woods, you don't have to go out that deep. So there's been, like I said, when we're using the file to punch through, most people wouldn't think the ice is safe enough and you shouldn't be out deep. But if you could catch fish in 2-3 feet of water, you're not taking a big risk. I've been on Lake of the Woods and Gerber for that matter. And when we need to use our waders, even to get from shore to the ice, sometimes the shoreline will break up, but the ice out 3 or 4 feet is just fine. And so, over in the bay, I was walking out and I started punching through foot at a time, and I was only in 4 feet of water, but it was mud, and so that was probably the worst I ever had it. I knew I was in shallow water where I couldn't drown, but getting back up on the ice, it was just a constant struggle. One step up 3-4 feet, break through all the way back to shore from out in front of the bulrushes there. So that was probably the most harrowing experience ice fishing I've had.
Yeah, that's why you have ice picks with you. And so fortunately my arms are still pretty good, but I'm just a fat man nowadays. But you're just those ice picks that you have with you are there to pull yourself out of the water,
yep.
Just in case it happens. So
that rupture you're talking about, that happens a lot, and not every year, but regularly, and sometimes multiple, and there'll be air pockets that open up, and sometimes a little hole all the way through. And for some reason, where the rupture is, there's something going on underwater that attracts fish too. And so I'll use those little holes as just a probe. You drop it down, you feel something real quick, you can get your auger in that spot. But there'll be a number of holes along that rupture, or where you can kind of prospect for fish.
Yeah, except it's layered typically. So
we punch through. I can't tell you how many days I've spent punching through that top layer down to the bottom. It's down there. It's 5-6 inches thick, but the snow compacted and then melted, and all that water stayed on top and then refroze. And if you're going to go ice fishing, you're going to deal with that. Sometimes you don't fall through the top layer, but then once you punch your hole, then the water starts coming up.
Yeah.
Because for some reason it behaves a little more. It behaves differently. It's under pressure or something. And then next thing you know, your whole area around your hole is too soft to stand on. We often fish with our waders or rubber boots or something like that for that reason.
Yeah, so do I. My snowsuit is a flotation suit too. So basically it's a suit that's also a PFD. And so if I do fall through, I'm not going to sink. And so it's a nice suit. It's a really good suit, but if I fall through, I will still float. So unless I fall all the way through, and they'll find me in the spring somewhere floating on the lake. But after the thaw. But it's, my son bought me a clam brand power drill adapter for the and it's got handles on it and a trigger, and I put my power drill on it, and it's fantastic. A couple years ago that was 40 inches of ice at Lake of the Woods, and I had to use an extension auger, and you're just I just don't have the strength or the stamina to hand drill through 3.5 feet of ice. And that's a ton. And by the way, if anybody goes Lake of the Woods, they will drill a hole for you for $5. $5, they'll drill a hole for you. When the ice is
I'll bring
like
a C
that,
note. It
just have them
started
do it.
about 4 a.m. I'll send you $100. Be ready when I get there.
Yeah, well, that's what you do. I always tell people, because you could rent an auger for $8 for the day. And I go, but when the lake's so thick, I go, you really don't want to do that. I go, just, go, I'll take you out. I'll put you in a good spot, and I'll punch some holes for you. And you just pay $5 a hole. So much easier. And then they can start fishing right away. And then they'll actually have a good spot. My favorite depth for ice fishing at Lake of the Woods is 16 feet. 16 feet is my Goldilocks depth. And I do have a few spots. I remember one time ODFW was out there, and they were in the wrong spot. They were actually really deep. They were out there past the marina, and they were in the real deep spot, about 45 feet deep. And so I walk out there. I go, you guys catching anything? They've been out there for a couple hours. They go, no, not really. I go, all right, pack it up. They looked at me. I go, just pack it up. I'm going to take you over to a spot where you'll catch the stuff all day long. And so, they pack it up and they follow me over to my spot. And I'm walking on the ice, and she has a fish finder. And I go, and I'm looking, and I says, okay, we're at 16 feet right here. She goes, how do you know? I go, let's punch a hole. You drop your fish finder in there. I says, you tell me what you see. And so she punched a hole and dropped the fish finder, and she goes, it's 16 feet. I go, I know. I know my lake. I go, now you'll catch fish. And so I think it took them about 5 minutes, and they started pulling up fish.
Perch.
Of course.
About perch?
Yeah, perch. But, that spot also, we've caught kokanee and trout there. And in the afternoon, suspended is crappie. And so you literally, and then if you go where you were, you were talking about that in that shallower area. I mean, trout's going to be everywhere, but that's also a good spot, strangely enough, for a brown trout and for a smallmouth. A smallmouth will come up and hit that area for food before rediving down. And
there's a spring. There's a spring in there. We've caught them with crawdads in their belly. If there's crawdads there, there's smallmouth there.
Yep. Yeah. No, that's a good spot for, even in the ice. That's a pretty good spot for the smallies. And then of course the browns. We've caught browns there pretty regularly too. So, I mean, Lake of the Woods is the easiest lake to figure out. I mean, if you know where the springs are, where this are, different habitats. It is the easiest lake to figure out. I have one video on, I don't know if it's called the Secrets of Lake of the Woods. And it just literally is one of those videos that shows you a map where you can catch all these different fish in the summer anyway.
Yeah. But they used to have them for all the lakes around here. There was one for Klamath, 4 Mile. I remember Hyatt and Howard Prairie. Yeah, the one pagers with a map and a legend with all the description of where to go and what to do there. Yep.
Wow. And I've gone to all the lakes.
Way back. That's like a late 80s thing from my memory. Yeah.
Well, way back. I mean, I've been married. I got married in the 80s. I was like, way back. I always love when people think, I turned 60. I'm 60 years old now. I turned 60 on the 11th of September. And I personally, is having that 6, there's something wrong with that. I don't feel 60. I know my body says different, but I don't feel 60 and I don't act 60. I have friends that are 60. They act old and they look old. So I don't know. I know I break down a lot, but I mean, still, I don't think I'm 60. There's something wrong with that. Something wrong with it.
Better than the
All right.
alternative.
All right,
Hey,
everybody.
we ought to do one of these shows where I could tell a few fishing stories one of these times.
You did.
Got a whole bunch down. I got more. Let's do another
Well,
episode.
we'll do another
Fishing
one.
stories.
We'll do another fishing story one.
That sounds good.
We all have fishing stories. I always love it when people come back from fishing and they say, I ask them how big their fish was and they hold their hands up. And then I'll ask them about 20 minutes later and their hands get wider. And then you go another hour. Now the hands are even wider. That's what a fishing story does. I mean,
It wouldn't be a good fisherman.
The older the story, the wider your hands become.
Unless it was
right,
a real
everybody.
lunker, then you never even do that to begin with.
All right, everybody. Ken and I always tell you the same thing at the end of every episode. Toad in, toad out.
Yes, sir.
Leave that area better than you found it. And I hate, and everybody hates finding trash where the beauty of nature is. So do that, and tight lines to all of you, and we'll give you some more fishing stories because Ken has so many of them. It's good to have Ken back.
Bye now.